Hello, 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 hello. So today we will be talking about problems, not relationship problems that you have with your mother or your spouse. We will be talking about economic problems, specifically the problems of South Africa. And if you follow news in even a marginal capacity, you will know there's a plethora of problems that South Africa is experiencing. Some of them are greater than others. For me personally, and at the moment of the making of this video, it would be basically unemployment, inequality, and crime. Those three things is holding South Africa back significantly, like really significantly. And if those three things alone can be solved, we can move forward. But all of these problems you'll see is quite a lot of them are interrelated and interlinked. If you solve one, you may solve some others, but if you put too much effort into one, then some others may get worse. So let's have a look. The first one we will look at is the high unemployment rate. Those of you who has ever been unemployed will know being unemployed is like a terrible experience. And a lot of South Africans are employed, especially the youth. South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates globally. This has remained a structural issue, exacerbated by economic stagnation, while skills mismatch and slow labor absorptions in key areas are key factors. So some of the details are the official unemployment rate hovers around 32 to 35%. Youth unemployment exceeds 60%. And informal labor absorbs, the informal sector absorbs some of this labor, the excess labor available, but lacks benefits and protections. So basically getting to the 30% unemployment rate, this can go as high as 50%, depending on how you measure it and who you are measuring. So if you're measuring, like, let's say, white professional individuals over the age of 45, then it will be very low. But if you look at black women under the age of 25, it may be as high as 60%. So it really depends on how you measure it. That's why those of you who are familiar with South Africa, or those of you who are South Africans yourselves, you will constantly see these rates like coming up or down, but it's really what you're seeing is just like different measurements. And quite often when they give the official rate of unemployment, they don't count in people who simply got disencouraged and stop looking for a job. Now that to you who are hardline conservatives and those people, to you it may sound like, okay, they're just lazy. Well, the fact of the matter is, go and look for a job for 10 years and don't achieve anything, that will discourage you. And then you're just like, look, I'm better off sitting at home living off the charity of my friends and wasting money actually going to town looking for a job. So there's all of these things. With regards to skills mismatches, this is a big issue. South Africa has had skill mismatches now for a very long time, maybe 30 years. And it's because the government had, we have these 5-year plans, much like China, but without the success, where they're like, okay, let's focus on this area, let's focus on that area, let's focus on this area. And then they would set up these skill centers for vocational work people, like people who, let's say, didn't do very well at school academically, but who can still do an artisanal job. They would set up these centers for them, and they may deliver quality workers. But these guys, for example, can't work in a factory. Then, if you look at certain factory workers are highly skilled. Even if you're a blue-collar worker, you're highly skilled. The problem is if you work at a car plant, and you become redundant and you move to a plant creating hydraulic cranes. A lot of your skills are transferable, but a lot are not. You'll require retraining, which will cost the company some money or just make the company hesitant to hire you in the first place. Then a bigger problem is there is this obsession in South Africa that, your education means everything and education can never be taken away from you, and education is noble and, the highest aspiration of human being. And then kids go and they follow their passions, or they follow what they think are easy courses. Mostly in the humanities, like sociology, arts, drama, these things, and then they're unemployable. Because to be an artist or a sociologist in South Africa, you have to be insanely good. You have to be really good to rise above the rest. If you're a sociologist, you need to be a guy who did so well in his PhD that the universities are falling over their feet to hire you. But even then, remember, a sociologist may not make as much money as someone who did medicine or engineering. Why? It's because medicine or engineering, adds more value. Like, it's more valuable. It's more scarce. Why is that? For sociology, you need the smallest amount of art. You need a small percentage to pass in school. Whereas to study engineering, when I did it, you needed 60% for math and science. And to study medicine, you needed 90% for all of your subjects. So you can see, even at the age of, because they start looking at these things, the universities start looking at these marks from the ages of, let's say, 17 and 18. So they take those 2 years. And even at such a young age, you can spot outliers. People who are just much better at certain things than the rest of us. And then they can say, okay, this kid got 95% for all of their subjects twice, 2 years in a row. This person's getting into medicine. So, that's how it works. So what they could have done with the people who did social science is instead of you have two options. Either you put them in a course where they do add value, artisanal course, or you force them to be an engineer or whatever, or a computer programmer. The other option is to halve their course, to, let's say, make one half sociology and the other half entrepreneurship, so that as soon as this person leaves university, they know no one's going to come to save you, not the private sector, not the government. If you want money from this, you need to be an entrepreneur. The same for artists. So essentially, this is what we're lacking at school in South Africa. I remember, we had very weak education around entrepreneurship. For me, entrepreneurship should be a compulsory subject. So we don't push these weak people into the economy. So that is skill mismatches. So the high unemployment rate. What are the causes? Low economic growth, poor education and training, and mismatched labor regulations. So, yeah, South Africa is a country of red tape, incredible red tape. So if you want something done, it takes forever. It's not a Singapore, it's not a Burundi, it's just, I don't know why they have so much red tape, like probably to swell the state. This is where I'm talking about efficiency, effectiveness, meritocracy, and essentially something like soft skills. You need all of these things to be effective. But the state has decided to swell up the state to absorb all of these unemployed people. So the state doesn't necessarily have the best people working for it. So they will then, some of them will go into education themselves, and they will give poor training because they were poor to begin with. They had poor skills. Rather than, making something simple, like autistic, like, trinkets or something to sell to tourists. I am not saying that's a bad job or a low job or a low class job. There is value in such a job, especially if it makes you happy, and even more so if it can bring in money. But if you're just going to waste everyone's time and everyone's money, including your own, or you're getting money all the time, more than you deserve, wasting your own time, wasting away trying to teach some people some skill that you yourself don't understand. Like, if you want to, those of you who are welders will know, it's not easy to do a good weld. Like being a welder takes a lot of skill, a good welder, because like you need to weld some big industrial tanks together, and if your welding process was shitty, those things may explode and take the lives of many people, and the plant may economically come to a standstill for a week. That's unacceptable. Then you get even higher skilled welders, these guys who dive like 50 meters below the surface to weld, natural gas pipes together. That's even a bigger skill. There is no such thing as, people should, I think one of the first things we should do in South Africa is take away the shame or whatever from being a blue-collar worker. There's no shame in it. Zero. Like, you're fulfilling a very important, part of society. It's like a society is supposed to function like an ant colony or a bee colony. Everyone, has a place, and everyone is productive. Even the person, carting away used cardboards or used glass bottles, they're very useful, because now the municipality doesn't have to spend money to go and get it. These people go and get it. And, that saves the municipality money, and that brings in extra money for them. There's that. But essentially, probably one of the biggest drivers would be our low economic growth. Now, I'll get into that a bit later, because there's, economic growth encompasses many things. Next up is income inequality. South Africa remains the most unequal country in the world, with a Gini coefficient above 0.63, 1 being the most unequal and 0 being not unequal at all. Some details include wealth and income remain concentrated amongst the small elite, The top 10% of earners account for over 50% of income. Inequality is racialized and spatially segregated. So there's two problems here. Maybe three. Like the first thing is, if it's racialized, it increases like friction that spills over into other areas of the economy, because now, people feel that it's an unjust society that may affect the performance of their work. They may be more likely to go on strike. They may be more likely to be ineffective and unproductive and inefficient workers. So I don't want to say they're jealous, but there's a certain feeling you get when you took, and this is how South Africa works, for those of you who don't know. If you are at the bottom of the ladder, not even the basic bottom of the ladder, that means you're unemployed and you stopped working, looking for a job. If you're employed and you work in someone's house cleaning the floor, okay, because of the apartheid system, South Africa is divided in these peripheries. So the inner city is always this dirty mess of criminals. Then you have the outer ring, or you have a middle ring where where some rich people and the middle class lives. And then the outer periphery is what we call townships in South Africa, which are essentially slums, okay? Now, you have to travel from those slums to like the second circle, and I have heard of trips that can take 3 hours, because we don't have rail. We'll get back to that. So you need to take a taxi, and so it's 3 hours to the job, 3 hours back. So already, then you get to work. Or if you're a cleaner in a factory, you get to work, and the blue collar workers eat better than you because, they have a bit more disposable cash. And then the owner rocks up in a Ferrari or a BMW 7 Series or whatever. That, excuse me, that creates jealousy, or at the very least, that removes some of your drive. Then also, essentially, if sorry, I'm recovering from the tail end of a cold. If the biggest problem with income inequality is that you have a small middle class. Now, any economist will tell you that a large middle class, is an essential driver for growth. It's not the super rich. The super rich goes and they may invest, okay? If they trust the country enough, they may invest in that country, and that will create wealth. But, once they have bought their Lamborghini and Ferrari, once they've bought their, 10 bedroom villa in a golf estate, once they have bought their second and third properties in the Cape, they don't spend a lot of money. They also just go for grocery shopping, so they make a few big purchases, but that is dwarfed by what the middle class pays. The middle class pays just because of numbers. The middle class pays much more. The middle class also pays the interest on the loans on their mortgages of homes and on the mortgages or the down payments of their vehicles. The loan service. So that money, for example, the loan service money that goes back into the economy via the banks, but that's the profit for the banks, and then the banks get taxed by government. So you can see that there is like the middle class pay tax in any case. So you see, the middle class is very important. And in South Africa, it's a major economic problem that we don't, take care of the existing middle class, stop them from leaving the country or whatever, protecting them from serious crime. And B, we're not growing them. We're not growing the middle class. And this, you can say a lot of it has to do with apartheid. Apartheid has created a lot of this income inequality because of it was just like, at one stage, white South Africans under the presidency of Thabo Mbeki had about the same lifestyle as the average Austrian in the European Union. Next up, let's look at low economic growth. South Africa's real GDP growth has stagnated below 2% for over a decade. Now it's like 0.1% for the first quarter of 2025. Recessionary periods in 28 to 29 and 2019 to 20. COVID-19 worsened growth trajectories. Growth fails to outpace population increase. So basically, the pie is essentially, the economy doesn't grow because people don't trust the South African government and some radicalist political parties to invest money in the country. I understand that. If you don't trust someone to pay you back, you don't borrow them money. Whether it's your dodgy cousin or whether it's a super, if it's a trillionaire Chinese investor who wants to build a couple of factories in South Africa. If you don't think you're getting your money back, you're not putting it there. And the thing is, if we're talking about economic growth rate of 1%, then essentially, it's going to take, we were like countries like Vietnam and Colombia were supposed to be our peers. Like now, they're overtaking us. Not only are they overtaking us soon, like 2030, they will be much better economies than ours, much more advanced economies than ours. You can already see this. Like 10 years ago, if you've gone to Colombia, how does Colombia look? 10 years ago, if you go to Vietnam, how does Vietnam look? And South Africa looked more advanced in many cases. Now it's vice versa. You've got better businesses in Vietnam and Colombia than you have in South Africa, better infrastructure, less crime, a bigger middle class. So you see, it worked out for them. It didn't work out. It didn't work out for us. And then essentially, because of the population growth, it's the same sized pie that now has to be divided amongst more people. So I understand there's a lot of Marxists who say, okay, that's fine. As long as the pie is equally divided, my size will still get bigger and I will have more than I used to have, even if it's 10 times more or whatever. That's fine. I understand that argument. But bottom line is, then you would have truly scared investment away. And that extra wealth that you have now acquired, essentially, it doesn't mean you can grow it, because the very low tier of society in many instances, they can't just grow automatically from capital as like common Marxist ideology would like you to believe. As I just said, there's a massive skill mismatch in South Africa. People can't monetize their degrees. This is the problem with education. People can't monetize. That's why I hammer so hard on entrepreneurship, because you need to help yourself. The state isn't coming. The state most certainly isn't coming to help you, and the private sector is extremely reticent to help you. So you need to monetize, and if this Marxist reallocation of capital works, you will have, like, let's say, some streetwise hustler entrepreneur who used to be dirt poor but knows business. He will be able to take his part of the capital and do something about it, whereas, you know, the poor person who has no skills, at best, at worst, who is a drug addict or who has several other socio-economical problems, like, you know, domestic abuse or whatever, they will just squander it. And then also you will weaken your middle class, which will then stop paying tax, or whose tax base will be severely eroded. And they will also, as an effect of this, they will also become more ineffective and inefficient and productive, because they'll be like, you know, why should I go to work, you know, for this money? Like, why should I go and work overtime? That, like, at the very least. And many middle class people work overtime because they're hunting for more money, they're hunting for promotions, they want to improve their CVs, or they simply want to protect their career prospects, you know, by staying at the company and, you know, not reduce the probability of being entrenched in future. So if you're just going to give, like, I know this sounds very neoliberal and shit, but like Ayn Rand and stuff, but it's the truth. Like, if you're just going to give someone something and they're not ready for it, to receive it, it's a waste. The only people who will benefit will be these very small time business people who, you know, works off, like, you know, 100 Rand a day or 200 Rands a day, and they have big dreams and they can do something, but they will still get so little, probably, that they're not going to become, you know, industrialists. Like, forget it. Like, also, I mean, they're not, like, skilled to, you know, they didn't get engineering training or whatever, so, or accounting or something. So there will be repercussions. So inequality is very sad. Inequality is very sad, but and it should be addressed. Whether you want to use triple BE or affirmative action, whether you want to use I'm more in favor of a socialist model where you tax the extremely super rich and then use that in targeted programs to help people escape domestic abuse, alcohol abuse, how to help these so-called hustlers or micro nano business people, how to help them to grow their businesses, because that's where you will get, look, South Africa doesn't have money, okay? That's where you get the most bang for your buck. Is you have to target areas where you'll spend money. Other areas will unfortunately not get money. So, for example, this universal income thing is a bit of a pipe dream. I also don't think South Africa needs a national army, or if we do need a national army, we only need normal troops. We don't need aircraft, ships, and tanks, because we are not in danger. Like, we're not in the danger zone. You know, like, Lesotho isn't going to invade us. Mozambique won't invade us. Like, so we're relatively safe. And yeah, we can save money in many ways and rather try to, like, address inequality. Then we have structural unemployment. Structural unemployment refers to a mismatch between skilled supplies supplied by workers and those demanded by employees. In South Africa, it's a legacy of both the apartheid era educational policies and modern misalignment in vocational training. Many unemployed individuals lack relevant experience or qualifications for growth industry, for example, ICT or green energy. Higher education often doesn't match market needs, and corporate mismatches exist. City jobs in cities, labor in rural areas. So yeah, this is something that. This is like, I would say, you can lay most of the blame of this on apartheid, because apartheid was designed, it was per definition designed to put black people in very low skilled jobs, like farm workers, miners, and domestic cleaners, if you're a female. It wasn't designed to make them doctors and accountants and stuff like that. You could do that, but only in a so-called Bantustan, which was like these small reserves for them, for black people. But I mean nothing sustainable and worthwhile. And apartheid ran for approximately 50 years, I think. But then you also have the new government who tried to fix this, and we're now 35 years in, and we still seem to be a long way off. And the government seems to be stuck in this mind of basically creating skills for people, skilling them up, which sounds awesome, but then mismatching it. They have no idea what industry needs or what investors might need. And once again, right now we're in a deindustrialization process. We have a lot of capital flight because, once again, people don't like the unions. They don't like the corrupt governments. They don't like crime. They don't like aggressive, extremist, populist parties. So they're scared. They're scared of South Africa, to be quite frank. And one way around this would be micro businesses. Where if you look at some of the most advanced countries on earth, most of their economy is based around micro businesses. It's not, it's not like massive industry, a factory that employs like 5,000 people. It's like micro industries. But you need to be an entrepreneur. If you're not an entrepreneur, you at least need entrepreneurial skills, including soft skills. Like, you need to be able to market yourself. You need to be able to speak to people, make eye contact, don't fart while you're speaking to them, stuff like that. And at the same time, you need to be able to read a financial sheet. You need to be able to do basic strategic planning. You need to be able to read the financial newspaper and know what's going on. These things are not being, taught. And we can get this, for example, from AI or the ICT sector in general, but I think these days AI in particular, you can get it from that, okay? Because you just need a computer to write a AI program. You don't need a lot of capital to install a solar panel, okay? I know people are super pro coal and super pro oil and so on and so forth. That's fine, you may be. But bottom line is, all those things require massive amount of transport cost. It requires maintenance. You use all these dodgy countries like Iran or Russia to provide the US now provides gas and oil, but they're also dodgy because with the US there's often some strings attached to, like, do ABC or it will cut off your oil. So that's the problem. And with windmills and solar panels, you don't have this. Like, you have much fewer problems. And I understand that you can't go to a green energy thing straight away. And I know it shouldn't be you shouldn't kneecap the entire economy to be all utopian. I fully understand that. All I'm saying is we have structural unemployment, and if we don't fucking solve this, it's going to be a huge problem. And factories in South Africa now has a tendency to close. Power plants now has a tendency to shut down for various reasons. And we have over-reliance on this. Like, in South Africa, it's a joke almost, but it's actually very true. If you want to make money in South Africa, go and look at all the shit the government isn't doing and start doing that. Like fill potholes, fix water leaks, like reconnect the electricity, install security lights, provide security, like freaking all of these things. If you can do this, you'll make money. And just because the market is so big, like you're basically, it's a blue oceans market that you're waltzing, you're not even walking into it, you're waltzing into it. Like, I'm not saying you're going to become a billionaire unless you're already a billionaire and you invest all that money in those sectors in South Africa, which you won't, because you'll probably be scared of South Africa. But unemployment, and this is what some Marxist people won't accept, we need investment. That is like micro businesses will help a lot. And I think this is the most long-term sustainable way. But the short-term boost we need, the methamphetamine injection into the buttocks, is a big industry, something that will create 10,000 jobs at a factory. And the trickle-down jobs, or rather the money spent by those people will be taxed or will be spent at the supermarket when they go to grocery shopping. Their vehicles will be maintained by auto workers, what have you. They will maybe have enough money to get a domestic cleaner. So you immediately erase a lot of unemployment. And government is simply the ANC, rather, the ANC plus its DA. In Afrikaans, we say skootwentjies, which means a lapdog. I'm not saying the ANC, the DA is the ANC skootwentjie. I'm just saying that a lot of people were hoping that the DA will push the ANC towards something, towards economic growth, which they haven't done yet. Let's be positive. Let's be positive, and maybe soon that may happen. So the impacts of the structural unemployment is long-term unemployment becomes entrenched. You become de-skilled. Like, after a while, you just forget how this machine works. You forget how to program. Whatever, you forget what the ratio of soap to water you need to make a certain mixture. And diminishing lifetime earnings, it will affect your pension, like making you even poorer in the future. And essentially, there's a very weak coordination between these so-called SETAs, that's these skill-based centers that's supposed to give you basic skills, universities, government, and employers. So there's very few communication skills. Like, under apartheid, there was a very good line of communication between all of these, between business, between government, between universities. So people knew, everyone was on the same page. Like now it seems people are in different WhatsApp groups. They're not paying attention to each other. I think there's a lot of big egos at the top of these, organs or organizations, and that creates a big problem for structural unemployment. Then we get to educational deficiencies, the stuff that I haven't mentioned already, but education is such a big issue. I can make a 10-episode series about education. Like, that's how bad it is. There are actually good ones. Private facilities give some of the best education in the world, but you need like a heck of a lot of money to put your kid into one of those facilities. A weak education system limits upwards mobility and human capital development. So you see, like lack of education creates a further, cyclical unemployment. 80% of schools are dysfunctional. When I mean dysfunctional, I mean truly, truly dysfunctional. Like they don't have toilets. They've got like pit latrines. Some of them don't even have roofs. They don't have desks. They don't have chairs. Like they don't have blackboards. They don't have even textbooks. So they often have no teachers who know what they're teaching. I think up to 30% of teachers in South Africa for mathematics and science don't understand the subject themselves. So you see, but you're measured in the same, you're measured in with the same national exam, and then you come out and you've got like a 30%, and you're now competing against someone who got a 60%. So you see, it's clearly here the big divide starts. There's low literacy and numeracy in early grades. Like literacy and numeracy, there's a strong relation. This is once again where cyclical poverty comes into the picture. Also a bit of apartheid, also the incompetence of the current government, and municipal governments that was run by the EFF and the MK party, municipal governments run by the DA party. They can't do you know how easy it is to teach someone how to read and write? It's this industry or this skill is thousands of years old. Like the ancient Egyptians did it, the Persians did it, whatever. So if they can teach people to do it, now, 5,000 years later, surely we can do it now, and we can do it much more effectively. Basic things are missing, either governmentally, with industry, or just with parents themselves. Quite often we make parents out to be these perpetual victims. They're not. A lot of parents were simply supposed to not have children. And if you don't believe me, go to your kid's school and ask around. There will be a couple of rotten kids who always bully, who have no discipline in classroom, who may, they're ungovernable, unless you send them out of the classroom, and even outside of the classroom, they'll cause chaos, but at least outside of the classroom, they won't bother the ones on the inside who are either willing to learn or at the very least, apathetic, but who are not, downright serial killers. a lot of people shouldn't be parents, and unfortunately they are. The only way out of this is to have a good educational systems, which we don't have. Then there's a disparity between the so-called former Model C schools and the township schools. The Model C schools I went to, no, did I go to a Model C school? I can't remember. Maybe I didn't go to Model C school. I'm too old. Like Model C schools came after me, I think. But essentially a Model C school was like you're partially funded by government and partially private funded. And then you have these slum schools or the rural schools, which is fully state funded, but the state, you know, like the parents don't provide any money because they simply can't. And there's a huge difference between these two schools. That's probably, you know, where you can get the full explanation or a partial explanation for this 30% pass rate from. It is that the impacts are that there's a skills pipeline that fails for industry, and a high dropout rates in high school and tertiary levels. Kids go into high school and many of them don't make it. Many. They fall pregnant at I've heard stories of kids falling pregnant at 11. It's very common for them to fall pregnant at 16. But then, I won't say, of course, your life isn't over. You can still be a great mother and a great caretaker, and maybe one day you'll be a billionaire, God knows. Like, you get amazing people out there. I'm just saying your life becomes hard. And if you're like pregnant by 11, there's multiple problems. Like, you have the same issue than the one I just mentioned. In addition, a crime was committed against you. Statutory rape. So you see, all of these societal ills, you know, feed into one another, and this is like a big thing holding the country back as well. Like we need to break cyclical poverty somehow, which is just feeding into all this other stuff, like basically education. And some of the policy gaps is inadequate curriculum reform and teacher training. Teachers are simply not being trained to the level they should be because they just care about pushing people out into the field at a certain rate. It's a very Marxist way of thinking. Look, I'm not a Marxist, I'm a socialist. I'm not a neoliberal either, but often these Marxists set goals. Neoliberals do it as well, by the way. They set goals which are either unattainable or which are totally unproductive, which will actually hurt you. And I feel like, look, it's fine if you don't understand a mathematical or a physics equation the fifth time after it being explained to you. It's okay. You know, like, we're not all geniuses. But eventually, if you want to be a science teacher, eventually you do need to understand this equation. And after that, you need to understand it well enough to explain it well to someone else who also don't understand it. And you'll have to spend 5 times explaining it to them. So this is the reason why they have to be trained. And then there's just poor accountability for underperforming schools. I put this down again due to the general failure of the state to put people. I will always, in most of my videos about these things, about like something that's failing, it will be poor productivity, poor levels of production, poor levels of inefficiency and ineffectivity. These 4 things. And very often our ministers, and it gets worse, like because the minister is well known by the press, like the people on the very ground, like the people controlling a municipality, God knows what kind of person they chose for you, like, or who you elected. You don't really have an idea. This person comes in and they may know the teacher, and then the teacher gets off scot-free, but it's the super incompetent teacher who may bribe that official to keep his or her job. Next up, big one, corruption and state capture. Corruption erodes trust, inflates public spending, and weakens institutions. Some key facts are that the Zondo Commission revealed massive corruption during the Zuma era. State-owned enterprises like SOEs, like Eskom, Transnet, and SAA were looted. Zuma kneecapped this country. Jacob Zuma, he took out like the 20 kilogram sledgehammer and he made South Africa lie on a bench, and he brought that hammer down at like 15 Newton on the kneecap, destroying it. The country will limp for I don't know how long. I won't see the end of this damage in my lifetime. That's how bad it is. Like a lot of the people on this, like on the Fanonian left, that's the Frantz Fanonian left, they will, which is a bit different than the Marxist left, it's not the same thing. They will argue that yes, but Zuma was trying to protect the people, he fought against imperialism or neocolonialism, he was trying to eradicate inequality, but I can take them on all of these issues. Bottom line, and then they will say one of their favorite comebacks or things they will say is there was apartheid, there was like corruption under apartheid as well. True, there was. But then my question is, how much? Like, do you have numbers? Was apartheid, like let's say over a 20-year period, was apartheid adjusted for inflation and all of these things? Was more money lost under apartheid, we're just talking about corruption now, not all the other stuff, than under Zuma? Just Zuma alone. We're not talking even about the rest of the ANC, just Zuma. I want to know that number. And secondly, like, Zuma is sometimes referred to as a president, like really. Like, prove to me that Zuma grew the economy. Prove to me that literacy rates went up. Prove to me that we used more electricity, which is the indication of industrialization. Prove to me that crime went down. All of these things. And the answer will be a solid no. Like, if you're a Fanonist left-wing guy, please put some numbers. And if you're an Ayn Rand, froth at the mouth neoliberalist, you can also put some comments. So, what did Jacob Zuma affect? All the state-owned enterprises, essentially. Like Eskom, that's the railway agency. Transnet is basically the roads. And SAA was the South African Airlines. They were looted. But these are just the big ones. If you include the network of Zuma, like the friendship circle, which is a huge circle, maybe 50 people, then you see corruption all over the place. At municipal level, provincial level, what have you, there's corruption. Like, and basically this had impacts. People, this scared the shit. Like, when Jacob Zuma, at one stage he decided, he wasn't stealing enough money, and he appointed his own Minister of Finance. Now, okay, look, the South African president is free to appoint ministers, but he displaced a very competent minister with a very incompetent minister. Well, the minister was so incompetent that we lost something like R500 billion or R1 trillion overnight on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. That's not the number, please correct me, but it's a huge goddamn number. Like you'll be shocked. That left the country like 72 hours. That was out of the country, and that was like so it caused investor flight. A few years later, since his initiation, it caused crumbling infrastructure, because obviously now people who are corrupt obviously no longer focus on their prime job, which is to do something like their job description. They are now focused on stealing. Like they go to these special meetings of whiskey and cigar in some dark corner of a lounge, a 5-star lounge somewhere, and they talk about how exactly they're going to launder this money. They're not sitting there at their desks, frantically doing calculations to figure out like how will we save money, what's the most effective way to build this road, where should this road go. They don't do that, of course not. And well, that's just a waste of taxpayer funds. That's why there was talk of a tax revolt, where a lot of the middle class wanted to stop paying taxes because they said, why? Like the infrastructure is falling apart. We're paying you taxes to keep this stuff going. Next up is fiscal deficits and rising debt. South Africa's debt to GDP ratio has surged from 27% in 2008 to over 70% by 2024, reducing fiscal flexibility. So some of the causes of this is excessive public wage bill. Yeah, so we pay our civil servants way too much. Point one. Point two, there's too many of them. I understand why there's too many of them. It is a natural, it's one of the functions of a state to employ more people by the state to reduce unemployment. So I understand that's logical, but there was no work ethic installed in these people. And there's many examples. Like if you gone to internal affairs, is like what we call the Americans Home Department. If you want to get your driver's license, your passport, it took, now it's much better, but it took months. If you want to get a water leak fixed, or a pothole filled, or a sewage pipe fixed, they don't even pick up the phone. Garbage was all over the place. The grass grew to the length of my waist. The grass on the sidewalks. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. So they employed people who are not capable. That is a fact. And then there's like the persistent bailouts of failing SOEs. Now, look, if it's a crucial state asset, and you may argue many things are, like especially if it comes to a state-owned defense company, there is a time when the state simply can't run it anymore, where they're inefficient, where they're incompetent, where they're ineffective, when they're just losing money all the time. Now the taxpayer has to pay this piece of shit that's never working. The trains are not on time. whatever. And then no one picks up the phone if you call them to complain about it. And you have to go rock up in person just to find out the person you want to talk to is sick or they're on lunch or whatever. It was very frustrating. It's still frustrating. So at one stage you have to sell SEOs. I'm more of a socialist. I believe that the state should own these big companies, especially when it comes to water and energy. But when you can't provide these things as a state, give it to someone who can. Whether it's a different government, private sectors, or whatever, get rid of it. And then there's the low tax base and rising interest costs. So essentially, we spoke about the middle class quite a bit. Middle class got eroded, like in many countries globally, but in South Africa in particular. So the middle class gets smaller, we have less tax. So we have to borrow more. The impact is sovereign credit downgrades, higher borrowing costs, and crowding out of social and capital investment. So, the sovereign credit downgrades can also be attributed to Jacob Zuma. Under President, remember, the apartheid government was bankrupt. No one wanted to borrow them any money because it's this massive liability. So Nelson Mandela started fixing it. They lifted sanctions at the very least. And then the hemorrhage stopped. Then his successor, Thabo Mbeki, started rebuilding the economy, starting off with basics. But after a while, we actually got credit upgrades, where I think at one stage we were high. We were like, I think A or something, A minus or something. Like we were really high on like people knew we were trustworthy. And then Zuma came in and he fucked up. The president came in and he fucked everything up. And when you borrow more money, like Argentina, like Greece, the interest payments increase. There was a lot of political resistance to cutting waste because essentially now politicians know they are not going to have a meal time. South African politicians want to have a meal time. Like the amount we spend on South African politicians for travel, overseas travel, like they don't stay in 3-star or 4-star hotels. They stay in 5 or 6-star hotels. They don't eat like, a steak and chips. They go for the lobster and the Moet champagne or whatever. That's what they eat. That's how they live. They don't take a Uber. They take some crazy ass limousine, for a 48-hour trip to New York, which they take a private jet. This is how they live. There's these so-called things, it's called blue light brigades. So a politician, even if it's a small politician, gets this blue light car following them, or basically in front of them. It's usually in front of them, unless you're the president. Then you get like fucking 10 or 10 plus you get like 8 motorcycles. I think I once drove past the president, Jacob Zuma, I believe, and for quite a while the entire right lane was blocked. The only benefit is they drove so fast. They went, the speed limit's 120. They drove probably, because first the motorcycles go in and they tell people, they show people it's police. They get off the road, get into this lane. And if that doesn't work, there's a second car. There's these big SUV BMWs or Mercedes. They just like flash their lights, and you get into the next lane, and then they just speed through. That's a lot of money, that we're wasting. And you may argue, okay, the Blue Light Brigade is only $5 million per month, but it's not just that. It's 1,000 different things like that we spend on the state, unnecessary things, and all of these things add up. And it's a huge drain on state coffers. So we have really, also the ministers themselves, we have so many ministers, like 30 ministers, and then they have deputy ministers. Like the United States have like 10. We have like freaking 30 or something, plus their assistants. They all get like these privileges, and it adds up. It adds up. And then there's poor enforcement of procurement discipline. So essentially, we have these things called tenderpreneurs, which are essentially people connected to the state quite often, and they then also suck the blood out. They start sucking the blood out of the state. That's also basically causing the fiscal deficit, because the money is there. It's just that these tenderpreneurs or these capitalists who ask they ask like 4 times the amount of money that it would actually cost. They come in and they fix the problem, but we lose all of this money. Then we have over-reliance on commodities. The economy is vulnerable to global commodity price cycles due to its narrow export base. So gold, coal, iron ore, and platinum dominates the export market. Because of a heavy dependency on China and Europe for demand. So you can go, if you go on Wikipedia, there's these, they cut it, it's usually a square, and then they show you in different colors, like what is where. With South Africa, like commodities is almost half of that square. Like, it's insane. And one thing that people don't understand on both the left and the right, right-wing, left-wing people, what they don't understand, they're always like, we're such a wealthy country, why are we doing so badly? Well, look, if you're exporting platinum to China, China's not retarded. Like, if China builds some machine, using some platinum as a catalysator or catalyst, once this machine's lifetime is done, they don't take the machine into the middle of the, East Chinese Ocean and dump it into the ocean. No, they take it apart and they recycle it. And that recycled platinum re-enters the Chinese economy. In fact, China is one of the biggest recycle economies, if not the biggest recycle economies in the world. So they're not amateurs at it. And it's not just China. The other countries, the other developed countries will do it as well. Okay, there may be, some supply chains and stuff, but bottom line is the stuff gets recycled. So we cannot depend on these commodities forever. Even if we have them now, not only is there price fluctuations on these commodities, these things get recycled. One may argue for benefication, and I'm not against benefication, but the thing is, with benefication, we need to have the skills upgrade, and we need investment. Without those two things, there will be no skills benefication. We can borrow the money for skills benefication, but as we said, there's a massive fiscal deficits. These things won't pay off themselves because beneficiation will take a long time to set up. So yeah, the risks are economic volatility during downturns and little downstream value capture. It's like we don't add value, like beneficiation, for example. And I think the ultimate would be beyond beneficiation if you can actually just use it to do extra value addition for your local market, especially in this era of deglobalization. Then we have like logistic and transport constraints. We have a lot of logistics and transport constraints. Dysfunction in rail, port, and road systems severely undermine productivity and trade competitiveness. Ports like Durban and Cape Town rank amongst the worst globally. Transnet's rail collapse impedes mining exports, and road freight faces hijacking, overuse, and under-maintenance. So, yeah, Durban, the last I saw, they made a list of 200 ports. That's like from the best. And number one was like, I don't know, some American or Canadian port, and then Rotterdam. And then the last one, or like number 150 or number 170 was Durban, which is like our biggest port to import stuff and export stuff from the Johannesburg area. So these things, our ports don't function. It's a serious problem. Like not just from an economic perspective, from a security perspective. You know, like what if we suddenly have a famine in the country and we have to import grain, and we can't because like the hydraulic cranes aren't functioning, you know, like, are we supposed to offload those, like, you know, 40-ton containers like they did in the 1850s? No, you know, we can't. The rail collapse is also, if you drive through South Africa, you'll notice there's so many rails that's just not working. Like, you can see the long grass, like, growing in the middle of the rail track. It's easy to see. And the roads are in really a bad state. You know, like there's a lot of potholes. When the trucks drive, especially if they're heavily laden, you'll see that there's like basically not holes, like ditches almost as they drive. Because of the weight. The weight presses the asphalt down. And then when you have a light car, if your car weighs like 1 ton, it's actually super difficult to drive on that road because of the trucks driving there. And they have to drive there because we don't have any proper rail. And also just you see once again, these things feed into one another. Getting back to the crime causes hijackings. Like, if you are a truck driver, in your brain will be an exit strategy of what do you do when you get hijacked. And that would be jump the fuck out of the truck and, you know, start running. You know, like let whoever is like trying to hijack the truck, let them have the truck. You're not going to fight for that truck. That's stupid. And well, overuse and under maintenance, very common in South Africa. Overuse and under maintenance. So yeah, it affects lower mining, higher transport costs, and we lose export contracts. Then next up, low R&D and innovation investment. South Africa spends under 0.8% of GDP on research and development, well below the global average. The implications are a weak innovation ecosystem, brain drain of scientists and engineers, and technological dependence on foreign firms. The root causes are low private sector R&D spend, few university industry linkages, and government funding constraints. Yeah, so we have like the CSIR in Pretoria, for example. It used to function very well 30 years ago, and then they just started cutting grants, and these places started making fewer products. A lot of scientists just left because they got better packages in different countries. Like, once again, the brain drain feeds back into this entire essay. Like, they left the country. And, you know, the government, what they should have done, if you don't want to create this another state mechanism, fine. But then create something like a startup ecosystem where, like, people can go and they can have startups. Like, if it's older people, connect them directly with suppliers and, you know, industrialists or whatever that can use their skills. Don't just let it rot. And that's pretty much what South Africa did. To fix this will take a very long time. Then next up, land reform failures. Land reform has failed to achieve equity or rural development, fueling both discontent and underperformance in agriculture. Less than 10% of land was transferred from white to black owners. Many farms collapsed due to lack of capital and support. Now look, those of you who don't know what apartheid is, you can just do a quick Wikipedia search. I have done some explanations in my other videos. But essentially, because of apartheid, whites own most of the capital and land. And it has to be transferred to, the majority has to be transferred to blacks to have a just and equal society. Simple as that. But the mechanisms of doing so has never truly been implemented. They tried, but they failed. And, you know, then when they failed, they didn't try again. Like, so here and there, so the land transition isn't as straightforward as it seems. But still, if you get a new farmer, you need to train them, because farming is a very, you know, as we spoke about the welders, you know, or the engineers, or signal engineer, or whatever, it's not easy to do, you know, like, it's not like making, I don't know, it's not like making pasta and sauce. It's like a complicated thing. And you need to train the farmers up so that the farm will be successful. The government just didn't think about it. So a lot of these farms failed. And they could have introduced more laws to force certain white farmers to sell fallow land that's not being used. And also the government itself has a lot of fallow land. That's agricultural land that they could have transferred, which they did not. Another problem, according to me, is, and what most intelligent people are looking at, is for all the slum dwellers, you use a GPS or satellite, and you give every of these little hovels or shacks a specific border or demarcation, and you say to those owners, this is your property, you and you alone, here's your title deed and your address and what have you. And then those people can go and get loans from the bank, because now they have collateral. This is where the pie gets thrown into the face of the Marxists, because they say the government should own everything. But if the government owns everything, how do you get a bank loan if you want to do improvements? If you want to send your kid to school, if you want to build a house, how can you do that without capital, without collateral? So, you need assets. And the government never really thought about that. And there's actually a lot of farmers who want to help, white farmers who want to help black farmers. But what they can do is limited because they also have a limited amount of capital. Staying with agriculture, in 1994, South Africa actually had 64,000 commercial farmers. Now we have, I think, 30,000 commercial farmers. And why is commercial farming important? Commercial farming is important because it's an industry of scale. The more you produce as a single company or unit, the cheaper it becomes. Peasant farming, or let's rather call it subsistence farming, it's a very lovely, romantic idea. The trad man and the trad wife, the Chad and the trad wife getting together, having 10 children, having non-GMO tomatoes. That's a beautiful... People who have that idea are fine to have that idea. I don't have a problem with them, God bless them. But they don't create enough produce to feed a town of 100,000 people. For that, you need a commercial farm or a couple of commercial farms. And the government and some of the extremist parties haven't taken this into account. Land has to be redistributed. No one can argue otherwise. But there has to be a strategy. There has to be goals. There has to be a timeline, and it has to be done by competent people, which, once again, government don't have, because government isn't interested in hiring competent people to do any kind of job. They're just interested in swelling up the state. So then there's also confusion between getting back to the land, confusion between restitution and redistribution models. So remember, restitution is when your property has been stolen. Okay, your land, the most heinous, or they call it the original sin, I believe, amongst black parties. And that was, I think, the 1913 Land Act, where they took away most of the South African black land, arable black land, and with water resources and everything, and they gave it to white farmers. Now, look, if someone steals my granddad's watch, and the thief sells it to someone else, and that person gives it to his son, who also sells it to someone else, it's irrelevant. The judge will re-award that watch back to me because it's my property. It always has been. Now, the rest in between is the state's problem. Like someone has to pay compensation, or, someone has to go to jail or whatever. But, there's a very strong claim for sentimentality towards land. If that wasn't true, you won't see all this stupid shit going off in the Middle East. So that has to be taken into account. There's one problem, though, which I foresee in this, is that if you were, let's say, 20, or if you were 30 in 1913, and now your land is stolen, like at this moment, then you have, let's say, 3 kids or 2 kids or whatever. Like, each of them also have 2 or 3 kids. Bring that forward 5 generations. Now, how does it work? Who gets the land? The oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son, and then his oldest daughter and her eldest son, or does it work that way? Or are you going to look for someone in that, because that population now of the descendants may be 10,000 people. Are you going to look for the most competent farmer amongst those 10,000 people, or are you going to equally divide this stolen land between the descendants of the original victim? They haven't figured that out yet. And then redistribution for me. So for me, there has to be a mixed model. Somehow you need to return some of the land to the original owner, simply because it's right, it's the moral thing to do. And with redistribution, this is to close the GNI gap. But with redistribution, I think very few people who knows anything about economics and productivity will say that someone who's not a farmer should get land, or who knows anything about farmers. Like, if you have a farm worker who didn't pass high school, like he maybe stopped school when he was 16 years old, and you have an accountant who went to Harvard, there's a strong possibility that this farm worker, who has been a farm worker for 30 years, knows way more about farming than the accountant from Harvard. So then I would say this is the most deserving of these people would be the farm worker, because even although he didn't go to some fancy agricultural school for 10 years and got a PhD, he does have hands-on experience, literally hands-on experience, because he works with his hands. This is something we have to figure out in South Africa, but the clock is ticking for this. We need to figure out land quickly, or else there will be some revolution. And complicating this further is tenure insecurity for farm dwellers and traditional land users. So on many farms you have farm workers who's been living there for, let's say, 3 generations, and their offspring is always like hired by the new farm owner, or the son of the farm owner. It's this weird it can be this weird plantation dynamic like you had in the US South. And in many cases it works out, is working out well, with the assumption that both parties are kind to one another. And then this will become this ecosystem where basically, for example, the farmers will bury, the farm owners will bury their dead on the farm. So will the farm workers. There will be graveyards on this farm. You know, your mom's graveyard, your grand's graveyard. Now the farm is being sold or redistributed or what have you. You lose access to that grave. You can no longer go there whenever you want. Like, because probably now you will have to move like tens, dozens, hundreds, God knows where you will live, kilometers away from the place where you grew up. For many people, like I'm kind of nomadic. For me, I don't care about that stuff, but many people are the opposite to me. They are very sentimental. And essentially, this should not be disregarded either. So this is like another variable in this equation. I don't think this equation is unsolvable. I think it is solvable, but I think more people should be educated about the challenges. And then I think in the entire South African population, there will be enough creativity to solve this problem. Rural inequality persists between large landowners and basically people who just live there in mud huts. And then you get low productivity on redistributed land. As I said, you get many people get land and they don't know how to farm. And then the argument is, but how dare you say that my family has known how to farm for generations? And that's true. But like planting, 100 cabbages, in your backyard is not the same as planting 1 million cabbages and getting them to Europe where they will be sold. Okay, not cabbages because that's a low value product. Like let's say roses. So it can get very technical, and then some of these farms that has been redistributed, high quality farms, vineyards, orange farms, coffee plantations, tea plantations, fell into total disrepair. So now the land value has decreased as well. There is no great land audit or land database. So in South Africa, so we can also still not fully understand the problem. And then the government simply, even if you're a commercial farmer, the government don't fully support you. You're on your own. And this is one of the reasons, the commercial farmers, the amount of commercial farmers went from 64,000 in 1994 to 30,000 now. Okay, I know global warming's involved. The bottom line is the smaller farmers, the 35,000 that got lost or so, they couldn't afford the insane insurance amounts that you have to pay monthly to keep this farm going. So that's the issue. Then next is the industrialization. Who doesn't have it? But for some countries, it's way worse. The manufacturing sector has shrunk from 20% to 12% of GDP since 1994, replaced by services and imports. The causes were expensive electricity and transport, globalization and trade liberalization, skill shortages and labor disputes. So the consequences then of this is job losses and town collapse, weaker exports and tech transfer, and greater dependency on imported goods. So, South African electricity has it was a hallmark of South Africa in the 80s and 90s that we had cheap electricity. I remember our home was always heated, in winter. And then by the late 90s, my dad started switching off the heater. He's like, okay, let's save some electricity. Globalization and trade liberalization, I can understand. If certain products become more affordable for the South African consumer, you should consider globalizing maybe even more. You should only, that's economics 101, by the way. For those of you who don't know it, you should only do what you're best at. You shouldn't try to cover everything, unless it's strategic. Now, actually, you can be better than industrialization by going into a skills economy. And I mean, this you can do online or whatever. You can be a doctor in South Africa and with these fancy robot operation thingies do operation in the United States over using satellite communication, and that becomes possible. And that's a highly, highly skilled thing. And that will bring in more money than, let's say, one of our blue-collar workers competing against someone in Cambodia who asks 1/3 of his salary. So the problem, however, is, as we said, go back to the education that I mentioned, we can't do this yet. We have started with a services economy, and I think that's the way we should go. But we are 10, 20 years away from it. Then we have the FDI volatility. Foreign direct investment in South Africa fluctuates dramatically, often driven by mining booms or political shocks rather than long-term industrial development. The trends are that commodity-linked FDI spikes create problems, sharp declines during unrest or government instability, and this causes minimal reinvestment in local economies and weak or backward and forward linkages in domestic firms. This creates fragile job creation and continued reliance on volatile capital inflows. That's all for now. This is just half of the problems that I could identify. Thanks for listening. See you later. Bye-bye.